4 decades on, and Cyprus remains divided by the buffer zone created to keep the peace between the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities. In the second of her special reports to mark the anniversary, Carla Prater goes on patrol with personnel from the Irish Guards, who are on duty with the UN peacekeeping mission. She joined them in the capital, Nicosia.
This is part of Nicosia few people will ever get to see. We're in the heart of the city centre, where time stands still. This is the buffer zone, a no-man's land between the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities on either side. The streets have been deserted for the past 40 years when fighting broke out. The Irish Guards patrol here every day as part of the island's UN peacekeeping mission. Away from the bustling city streets, it's an area of calm. But in 1974, the fighting here was intense, with opposing forces just metres apart. One stretch is called Spear Alley because of how close they were.
At one stage, this was the most densely occupied frontier in the world, with about 500 troops on either side. So there was 2 soldiers, one on either side on duty, just watching each other, and one fell asleep. So the Greek soldier made a spear out of a couple of broomsticks on his bayonet, reached across and speared the Turkish soldier. This was the narrowest point in the buffer zone across the whole island, 3.3 metres wide, so incredibly tense.
The people that used to live and work here fled, leaving everything behind. The area was ransacked in the fighting. Now the buildings stand crumbling, entwined with barbed wire, scarred by the violence. For troops serving here, it's a unique place to patrol.
Where we patrol, all the OPs are quite close to us and that, so we can see a lot. We notice things a lot more when they change. It's dark and that, it's a bit eerie and that.
It's quite a confined space in the city itself. Obviously in Neskliff, we prepare as much as we can, but it isn't until you get out here and you're driving around en route to where you'd be entering the buffer zone that you sort of you have to learn everything quite quickly. It's like you are properly thrown in the deep end.
Even after all the destruction and chaos, in parts of the city, there are still things that have survived.
So this is what we call the museum, which is a collection of things troops have found while they've been patrolling. We've got newspapers from 1974, obviously the sewing machine, books of swatches, old cans of beer and bottles of Coca-Cola, Spam, the old TVs. It's quite a collection of things from the 70s when they all left so quickly and they're all just left behind, so it's stepping back in time to a certain extent.
Here they're being preserved, and some items are particularly special.
In amongst all the ruins and rubble, there are a few unexpected surprises. This was once a car dealership, and in July 1974, they'd just taken delivery of 50 brand new Toyotas. They were put in here for safety as the fighting broke out, and here they still stand. This Corolla only has 33 miles on the clock.
There are observation posts on either side of the street. Earlier this year, the Turkish forces added CCTV cameras to some sentry posts, a matter which is still being investigated by the UN. The Irish Guards have to work closely with both sides, checking for violations, making sure personnel and civilians don't flout the rules.
You get things like farming permits, and they're quite quickly resolved. Bigger issues might be there's a big event that's going to happen in one side or the other, and therefore we need to kind of coordinate security for that. It is a challenge. It's unique. Certainly, it's not Helmand. It's not other tours, Iraq or whatever that the British Army has been involved in before. There are things that I've learnt and other people have learnt from previous tours which you can apply here. Certainly, how to negotiate the liaison aspects, and that is quite similar to here and what we're doing.
Just outside the city centre lies Nicosia's old airport. In the 70s, 750,000 people used to fly from here. During the fighting, it became a focal point for both sides. But today, it's left derelict. Just one jet still standing, abandoned by the runway. This site has become the UN's headquarters for a mission which has been running for 50 years. It was set up in 1964 when the two communities started fighting. This is their anniversary year, and a time to reflect on how their mission has changed.
The biggest initial change, I suppose, was in 1974 when it became a peacekeeping mission between two armed forces of the Greek Cypriot National Guard and the Turkish forces in the north. Initially being very much a military-led operation, it has evolved over the years into being much more civilian-led. The third big difference, I think, is the ratio of troops to police and police and troops to civilians. There's a much smaller military force than there ever was, now only 860. There's only just under 70 police left and a larger civilian component than there was in the past. However, the mission, the mandate, hasn't changed since 1964.
The landscape hasn't altered and the mission's main aim remains the same. But all around the buffer zone, Cyprus is changing. The country wants to move on from the past, but this division is a scar that runs deep. Land stuck in a past that no one can forget. Carla Prater, Forces News, Nicosia in Cyprus.